Quick intro. Before going on a fishing trip, Mr. Wilson came up with the following list: fishing pole, box with extra hooks, fishing lines and other gear, can of worms, beer mug, bottle of beer, potato chips. In the morning, Mr. Wilson takes that list and checks his backpack for the availability of each of the 6 objects. Each item on his list is a test case. The list itself is a test suite. The process of figuring out and writing down each item is test case generation. The process of checking the backpack for the availability of each object on the list is test case execution. An essential part of the test case is the expected result. For instance, bottle of beer. Thus, a test case can only consist of only an expected result. Please note that in this unit we'll talk about the formal side of a test case, in other words, test case structure, useful attributes, formatting, etc. In future lectures, we'll learn about the actual side of a test case. That's about test case content that would have high probability of finding a bug. Test case structure. The problem with a test case having only the expected result is that the expected result alone might not be sufficient to perform the test case execution. In the case of a bottle of beer, we can unzip the backpack and look inside. In the case of software, as a rule, we need an instruction on how to reach an actual result. Example: our red-hot startup, www.sharelane.com, has a new employee. Let's call him Samuel Pickwick. Some friendly fellow hands him the following one-line test case. Payment can be made by Visa. Mr. Pickwick's brain immediately generates 2 perfectly reasonable questions. How can I do testing if I don't have a Visa card and don't know where to get one? How can I be sure that a payment was really made even if I had that Visa card? One thing that is more or less clear is the purchase process. For example, create new account and log in, find a book to buy, put it into the shopping cart, do checkout. But even with this common knowledge, the test case execution will be stuck at the point where the tester enters credit card information. In other words, that test case cannot be executed by Mr. Pickwick without someone helping him. The situation is bad because it adds even more stress to Mr. Pickwick's first days at his new company. Mr. Pickwick must interrupt the work of other testers to get the information he needs. It's a completely different situation when Mr. Pickwick is given a proper test case. Example: please open up the file test case example 1 and execute the steps along with me. Go to main.sharelane.com. Click link Test Portal. Click link Account Creator. Press button Create New User Account. Copy email to the clipboard. Go to main.sharelane.com. Paste user email into text box email. Enter 1111 into text box password. Press button Login. Enter expectations into text box Search. Press button Search. Press button Add to Cart. Click link Test Portal. Click link Credit Card Generator. Select Visa from drop-down menu. Press button Generate Credit Card. Copy card number to the clipboard. Go to main.sharelane.com. Click link Shopping Cart. Press button Proceed to Checkout. Select Visa from drop-down menu Card Type. Paste card number into text box Card Number. Press button Make Payment. Write down Order ID. Click link Test Portal. Click link DB Connect Utility. Make database query. Select results from CC transactions where ID equals order ID. Expected result is 10. In our last example, let's refer to it as test case with credit card. The expected result was preceded by steps that are supposed to lead the test case executor to an actual result. These steps are called the procedure. Here is an analogy for you. The procedure is a set of steps on a staircase. The expected result is a certain object we are supposed to find if we climb to the top of that staircase. The actual result is what we actually find when we reach the top of the staircase. Brain positioning. If we apply the computer science concept of input, output, we'll have this. The procedure is the instruction about input. The execution of the procedure is the act of input. The expected result is the expected output. The actual result is the actual output. Results of the test case execution. The test case execution is complete once we have compared the actual and expected results. This comparison can give us one of two results. Pass, that's when actual result equals expected result. Fail, that's when actual result does not equal expected result. Is that necessarily a bug? Let's see. Brain positioning. If the test case execution result is fail, it doesn't necessarily mean that we found a bug. Here is a typical startup situation. Product manager communicated certain change with programmer, but none of them communicated that change with test engineer. So code is going to be legitimately changed, but the test engineer is not aware of it, and test case execution will end up with a fail. Thus, the fail would be caused not by a bug, but by the fact that the expected result known to tester is wrong. By the way, sometimes we have a situation where the test case execution is blocked, so we cannot get to the actual result. For example, in test case with credit card, we can be stuck at step 23 if the Make Payment button doesn't exist on the web page. In that case, we would file a bug about the absence of the Make Payment button, and we would delay the execution of this test case until that bug is fixed. Useful attributes of the test case. In addition to essential parts like expected result and procedure, test case can have a number of useful attributes to make our lives easier. Unique ID. Priority. Idea. Setup and additional info. Revision history. Unique ID. This is an extremely important attribute. A test case without an ID is like a house without an address. The test case ID should be unique, not only within the concrete test suite which contains that test case, but also within all test suites inside the company. The rationale for this is that as time goes by, it will be necessary to keep test case statistics, update, remove, or move test case between test suites, etc. Priority. The test case priority reflects how important this test case is. The priority is graded from 1 to 4, with 1 being the highest priority. For example, the test case that checks if the Make Payment button works must be P1, and the test case that checks the color of the web link contact is P4. Why do we need to prioritize test cases? Let's assume that we have two test cases, P1 and P3. We have enough time to execute only one of them. Which one do we pick? P1, of course. Test case prioritization is especially important during regression testing. That's testing of old functionalities. Later on, we'll talk about regression testing a lot. How do we assign a test case priority? As a rule, the author of the test case decides the importance of the thing being checked by that test case. Idea. This is a description of what we check for in a particular test case. Example, in the test case with credit card, expected result is 10. What info do we get by looking at 10? Nothing except 2 digits. However, the developers of www.sharelane.com have developed the following process to create a code for the result of a transaction. The first digit corresponds to the internal ID of the credit card, 1 for Visa, 2 for MasterCard, and 3 for Amex. Let's look into the ShareLane database. Go to Test Portal, DB, Data, CC, Types. The second digit is the success code, 0 for a successful transaction and 1 for a failed transaction. Now, we have the full understanding that 10 means the transaction with Visa was successful. The problem is that even the author of the test case with credit card can forget what 10 means. That's why at the beginning of a test case, its author should put in human language the following phrase: payment can be made by Visa. So everyone who must execute that test case will immediately understand what is being tested. Setup and additional info. A culinary recipe consists of two parts: a list of ingredients, instructions on how to fry, steam, or bake those things. The first part of a recipe is needed to enable a chef to see beforehand and in one place all the necessary ingredients of the recipe and have them ready once the time comes to prepare it. This is a very practical first step. The setup part of a test case can include information about existing, also called legacy user accounts, or instructions on how to create a new user account. Data used in the test case, for example, default password for testing. SQL queries, also called SQL statements, are the commands used to interact with a database. Short for database is DB. SQL stands for Structured Query Language. Comments to help the tester, for example, instructions about where to get the software needed for the test case execution, for example, Windows software to connect to the DB. Other items that can ease the execution and maintainability of the test case. We'll talk about maintainability in a minute. Revision history. In order to have data about the birth and history of the modifications for each test case, we create a mini journal of any changes where we record when, who, why, and what. We'll have these statuses: created, date, name for when the first version of this test case was created and who created it. Modified, date, name for when any change to the test case took place and who was responsible for the change. Reason, why the test case was changed and what was changed. Test case management systems record revision history automatically. Now let's create the test case with credit card using all the mentioned test case attributes. Please open up the file Test Case Example 2 to see the result. Data-driven test cases. The main advantage of our brand new test case with credit card is that we don't have to modify the steps necessary to test other credit cards if we want to test them in a similar way. One thing we do need to modify, however, is the test case data. So if we want to test two more cards the same way we just tested Visa, we do copy one time. Do paste two times. In both new test cases, we don't change any steps. Instead, we change only the two values located in the header and the expected result. Remember that we also have to change the test case ID and any other attributes. These values are Visa and 10. This type of test case is called data-driven because the data and the steps using that data are not mixed up but separated and linked to each other. Lesson recap. An essential part of the test case is the expected result. The test case steps, procedure, serve as an instruction of how to reach an actual result, output. The test case execution ends with a pass or fail result. A fail result is desired because in that case we have a bug, provided that the test case reflects what's really expected. The test case execution is considered incomplete if the tester couldn't execute all the steps. For example, in a situation where the test case execution is blocked because of a bug in the middle of the execution. The following test case attributes are very useful. A unique ID is unique not only within a test suite, but also among all test cases existing in the company. A priority is a value from 1 to 4 inclusively, which reflects the importance of a test case. The practical consequences of having differences in priorities. A P1 test case is more important than a P2 test case, and if we have time to execute only one of the two, we would execute the P1 test case. An idea, a written description in human language of a test case idea. The setup and additional info gives the test case executioner helpful information for test case execution. This section is commonly used to store data, account information, SQL statements, and other pieces of information which help to execute test cases and make them more maintainable. The revision history helps us to know history behind the test case modifications. In a data-driven test case, the data and the steps using that data are not mixed up, but separated and linked to each other.